The old floorboards of my apartment had a language all their own. A groan near the door meant the pizza delivery guy was early. A creak by the window was just the building settling in for the night. But the particular series of thumps and sighs that echoed up the stairwell at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday could only mean one person. Alex. And Alex never came over on a Tuesday. My heart did a stupid little flutter kick against my ribs, a Pavlovian response I'd spent the better part of a decade trying to train out of myself. It was a useless, hopeful reflex, like a phantom limb aching for a touch it could never feel again. I was in the middle of sketching, the charcoal a dusty smudge on my fingers, the soft scrape of it on the textured paper, the only sound in my quiet life. The knock on the door was a percussive shock. 3 sharp raps. His signature. Not the lazy knock of a neighbor borrowing sugar, but a confident, impatient rhythm that said, "I'm here. Let me in." I wiped my hands on my jeans, a futile gesture that only succeeded in creating a gray smear on the worn denim. My life was a collection of such smears, faded, indistinct, the residue of things I tried to create but never quite finished. I looked around my living room, which was also my studio and dining room. Canvases leaned against the walls in various states of incompletion. A half-eaten bowl of cereal sat on the coffee table. It was the curated chaos of a man who spent too much time alone, a man whose routines were sacred because they were all he had. Opening the door felt like breaking a seal on a carefully preserved tomb. And there he was, a vibrant slash of life on my drab landing. Alex. He was holding a 6-pack of craft beer, the cardboard sweating with condensation. His hair was a little damp, probably from a late session at the gym, and it curled just over the collar of his gray Henley. The shirt stretched across his chest in a way that always made my breath catch. He smelled of clean sweat, citrusy deodorant, and the crisp night air. It was a combination so familiar it was practically a part of my own sensory memory. "Hey," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate right through the floorboards. He offered a smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. There was a tension in his jaw, a tightness around his mouth that wasn't usually there. Alex's smiles were normally wide, easy things that lit up his whole face. This was a placeholder, a mask. "Tuesday." I managed, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. Bold choice for a school night. "We need to talk," he said it without preamble, stepping past me into the apartment as if he owned the place. In a way, he did. He owned the part of me I kept locked away from everyone else, the part that still remembered late-night study sessions in our college dorm, the smell of cheap coffee and his cologne, the easy way he'd thrown an arm around my shoulders. He set the beer down on the cluttered coffee table with a decisive thud. The sound echoed in the sudden, heavy silence. My stomach plummeted. "We need to talk." Those were the 4 most terrifying words in the English language. They were the harbingers of doom, the verbal prelude to breakups, bad news, and life-altering confessions. My mind, a frantic librarian of worst-case scenarios, immediately started pulling files. He was moving. He was getting married to Stephanie, the flavor of the month he'd been seeing. He'd discovered my secret, the vast and pathetic ocean of my feelings for him. And he was here to let me down gently, to sever the tether of our friendship before it became too awkward. "Okay," I said, closing the door. The click of the latch felt unnervingly final. I turned to face him, leaning back against the solid wood, needing its support. My role in our friendship was that of the steady observer, the quiet port in his chaotic storms. I was the listener, the constant, the one who never asked for anything. And I had learned, through years of painful practice, to keep my own heart safely tucked away, an unread book on a high shelf. But right now, that book felt like it was about to tumble down and spill all its secrets across the floor. He was already twisting the cap off a beer, the hiss of carbonation sharp and aggressive in the stillness. He handed it to me, his fingers brushing mine. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt up my arm. It always did. A tiny spark of electricity that my body registered even if my brain tried to ignore it. His skin was warm, calloused from his work in the woodshop he ran. Mine was soft, stained with charcoal. We were different textures, different worlds. He took a long swallow from his own bottle, his throat working. I just stood there, holding the cold, damp glass, watching him. I watched the way the overhead light caught the gold flecks in his brown eyes, the way a single muscle twitched in his cheek. I had spent 12 years watching Alex. It was my primary occupation, my unfortunate specialty. I knew the subtle shift in his posture that meant he was stressed, the slight downturn of his lips that signaled disappointment. Tonight, he was a puzzle I couldn't solve. He was broadcasting a dozen signals at once: anxiety, determination, something that looked dangerously like regret, and I couldn't get a clear read on any of them. He finally met my gaze, and his was intense, unreadable. "You just gonna stand there, Leo?" "I am. I'm just going to stand here." My mind is a whirlwind of panic and a deep, aching dread. I'm cataloging every detail of this moment, preparing to store it away in the museum of our friendship, filing it under the exhibit titled, "The Beginning of the End." I am terrified of what you are about to say, of the words that will rearrange the entire landscape of my life. "Just waiting for the verdict," I said instead, aiming for a lightness I didn't feel. A little bit of our usual banter. It fell flat, a dead weight in the air between us. He didn't smile. He just kept looking at me, his eyes searching my face for something. And for the first time in a long time, I had the unnerving sensation that the observer was being observed. That for once, he was the one watching me, really watching, and I had no idea what he was seeing. I moved from the door, the invisible tether of his gaze pulling me forward. I sat on the edge of the armchair opposite the sofa where he'd settled, my body perched as if ready for flight. The chair was worn, the fabric frayed at the arms, but it was my safe space. From here, I could maintain a controlled distance. I could watch him from across the moat of the coffee table. He sprawled on the couch, all long limbs and casual grace, taking up space in a way I never could. He filled my small apartment with his presence, his energy a humming, vibrant thing that made the very air feel thick and charged. I took a sip of the beer. It was bitter, hoppy. It tasted like anxiety. He watched my throat as I swallowed, and I felt a sudden, acute self-consciousness. I set the bottle down on a coaster, my hand not quite steady. The small clink of glass on ceramic was deafening. He was still silent, just looking. His gaze wasn't hostile or pitying. It was something else. It was focused, intent, like a scientist studying a particularly baffling specimen. And I was the specimen, pinned to the velvet of my own life, exposed under the harsh light of his attention. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, the beer bottle dangling from his fingers between his legs. The movement was slow, deliberate. It shrank the space between us. "How long have we known each other, Leo?" he asked, his voice quiet now, stripped of its earlier tension and left with a raw, gravelly edge. The question was so out of left field it momentarily short-circuited my panic. "What? How long?" he repeated, his eyes never leaving mine. 12 years, I answered automatically. "Since freshman orientation. You were wearing a hideous yellow polo shirt and tried to convince me that geology was a panty-dropper major." A ghost of a smile finally touched his lips, a faint tremor. It could have been. I had a rock collection and everything. The smile faded as quickly as it came. 12 years. And in all that time, have I ever lied to you? My brain stalled again. Where was this going? This wasn't the "I'm getting married" speech. This wasn't the "I'm moving to Oregon" speech. This was something else entirely, a path I didn't recognize, and every step felt like it was on unstable ground. "No," I said slowly, truthfully. "Not that I know of. You're brutally honest, even when you shouldn't be. You once told me a painting I'd spent a month on looked like a depressed sunset." "It did," he said, without a trace of apology. But I didn't lie. He took another drink, a long, thoughtful one. He set the bottle down on the floor beside him, and then he just looked at his hands. Big, capable hands. Hands that could build a table from a raw slab of oak, that could fix a faulty engine, that had once, after my first real heartbreak, rested on my back in a gesture of such simple, profound comfort that I'd almost shattered. I am watching him. I am watching the play of muscle in his forearm as he clenches and unclenches his fist. The light from my drafting lamp casts long shadows, carving out the lines and planes of his face, making him look older, more serious than the carefree guy I'd always known, or the guy I thought I'd known. The silence stretches, pulling taut between us. It's not a comfortable silence, not the easy quiet we can usually share. This silence is filled with the weight of unspoken things, of the 12 years he just invoked. 12 years of me loving him from a safe distance. 12 years of me being the reliable, platonic, safe friend. I'm not happy, he said, the words dropping into the silence like stones into a deep well. He wasn't looking at me now. He was looking at a spot on my worn rug, as if the answers were woven into the faded threads. My carefully constructed defenses began to crumble. This wasn't about him leaving me. This was about him needing me. The familiar role. I could do this. I could be the friend. Stephanie, I asked, my voice gentle. He shook his head, a quick, dismissive gesture. No, not her. Not really. It's not anything like that. He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were dark with a frustration I'd never seen in him before. It was a deep, soul-level weariness. It's like, I'm going through the motions. I build the furniture, I go on the dates, I hang out with the guys. I do all the things I'm supposed to do, and it all feels hollow, like I'm acting in a play about my own life. I didn't know what to say. He'd never been this vulnerable with me. He was the one who had it all figured out, the one who moved through the world with an effortless confidence that I could only envy. To hear him speak of this emptiness was disorienting, like seeing the sun rise in the west. Everyone feels like that sometimes, I offered, the words sounding weak and inadequate even to my own ears. Do you? He shot back, his gaze sharp, pinning me again. Do you feel like that, Leo? Do I? I live in a state of perpetual hollowness, a quiet ache of loneliness that I fill with work and routine. My life is a carefully controlled environment designed to prevent any major emotional upheavals. It is safe, and it is empty, but I would never admit that to him. Admitting it would be admitting why it was empty. Because the one thing, the one person, who could fill it was sitting 3 feet away from me, breaking my heart with his own. I have my work, I deflected, gesturing vaguely at the canvases around us. That's not what I asked. He leaned forward again, the intensity ratcheting up, the air crackling. He closed the small gap between the sofa and my chair, his presence suddenly overwhelming. I could smell the hops on his breath, see the faint stubble on his jaw. My senses were flooded with him. I'm tired of the motions, Leo. I'm tired of pretending. My heart hammered against my ribs. Pretending? What was he pretending? That he was happy with Stephanie? That his custom furniture business was fulfilling? Or was it something else? A wild, impossible thought, a tiny seed of hope I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten it was even there, began to germinate in the dark, fertile soil of his words. I crushed it instantly. Hope was a dangerous, reckless thing. I watched him, my own silence a shield. I focused on the details to keep from drowning in the implications. The way the thread on one of the buttons of his Henley was coming loose. The small, faded scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood fall. The sheer, physical reality of him. He was so incredibly real, so solid, and I felt like a ghost in my own apartment. He let out a long, slow breath, a sound of profound exhaustion. This is harder than I thought it would be. He ran a hand through his damp hair, a gesture of frustration that I'd seen 1,000 times before, usually when he was wrestling with a tricky dovetail joint or a warped piece of maple. Now, he was wrestling with words. Alex, whatever it is, you can just say it, I said, and I was proud of how steady my voice was. It was the voice of the good friend, the reliable friend, the rock. Inside, I was disintegrating. He looked at me then, a long, searching look. His eyes traced the lines of my face as if he were seeing me for the first time, as if he were trying to commit me to memory. The silence stretched again, but this time it was different. It wasn't empty. It was full. It was humming with a strange, terrifying energy. It felt like the moment before a lightning strike, the air charged and heavy with ozone. Then he moved. It was a fluid, decisive motion. He stood up from the sofa, and for a second, I thought he was going to leave. I felt a bizarre mix of crushing disappointment and profound relief. But he didn't move toward the door. He moved toward me. He took the 2 steps that separated us, his shadow falling over me. He stood right in front of my chair, forcing me to crane my neck to look up at him. He was so tall, so solid. He blocked out the light. He blocked out everything. There was only him. My breath hitched. My heart was a frantic drum against the cage of my ribs. What is happening? The question screamed in my mind, but no sound came out. I was frozen, trapped in the intensity of his gaze. He reached down, his hands surprisingly gentle, and he took my beer bottle from my unresisting fingers. He placed it on the coffee table beside his own. The gesture was intimate, proprietary. Then his eyes came back to mine. They were dark, serious, and filled with a resolve that stole the air from my lungs. He held out a hand. "Stand up, Leo." It wasn't a question. It was a quiet command. And my body, which had apparently decided to betray my brain entirely, obeyed. I placed my hand in his, and his fingers wrapped around mine, warm and strong. The calluses on his palm were a rough, grounding texture against my skin. He pulled me to my feet effortlessly. Now we were standing toe-to-toe, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. So close I could see the frantic pulse beating in the hollow of his throat. He didn't let go of my hand. His thumb started to draw slow, deliberate circles over my knuckles. It was a tiny, devastating movement. A gesture of such focused tenderness that it completely dismantled my defenses. This is it. This is the moment, he tells me. He's going to say the words that will change everything. He's going to say, "You're my best friend, Leo, and I need you to be my best man." Or, "I'm so sorry, but I can't do this anymore." My mind raced, trying to brace for the impact. But he didn't speak. The silence was absolute now. The only sounds were the frantic beat of my own heart and the soft, almost inaudible whisper of our breathing. He was still looking at me, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. He was searching for something in my eyes, and whatever he found there seemed to solidify his resolve. His other hand came up, not fast, but with a slow, inexorable certainty. It settled on my waist, his fingers splayed against the thin fabric of my t-shirt. The warmth of his palm seeped through, a shocking, branding heat against my skin. My entire body went rigid. Every nerve ending was on high alert, screaming. This was not a friendly touch. This was not the casual, platonic contact of our 12-year history. This was something new, something terrifying, something I had only ever allowed myself to dream of in the lonely, secret hours of the night. His hand tightened its grip, his thumb pressing into the dip above my hip bone. And then his other hand released mine and came to rest on my other hip, mirroring the first. He had me. He was holding me, his hands firm and possessive, anchoring me in place. The posture was one of control, of intent. He had closed the final inch of distance between us, and my body was thrumming with a mixture of pure, unadulterated terror and a wild, soaring hope. I opened my mouth to say something. His name. A question. A plea. I don't know what. But before I could form a single word, he leaned in, his forehead coming to rest against mine. His eyes were closed. I could feel his eyelashes flutter against my skin. "I've spent months," he whispered, his voice a rough, broken thing against my skin, "trying to find the words to say this. Trying to figure out how to talk about it without ruining everything." I couldn't breathe. My lungs had ceased to function. I was living on the charged air between us. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eye. His gaze was raw, vulnerable, and utterly resolute. A universe of unspoken things passed between us in that single, silent moment. 12 years of friendship, of shared history, of my secret, painful longing, all converged into this one, impossible point in time. And then he said the words that shattered my world and rebuilt it all at once. "We're done talking." His hands tightened on my hips, pulling me flush against him. There was no space left between us, no room for doubt or retreat. And then his mouth was on mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It wasn't tentative or questioning. It was a kiss of profound, desperate certainty. It was hard and hungry, a release of years of unspoken tension. His lips were firm, insistent, and they tasted of beer and a truth so overwhelming it buckled my knees. I gasped against his mouth, and he took the sound as an invitation, deepening the kiss, his tongue tracing the seam of my lips before sliding inside. My mind went completely, blissfully blank. There were no more scenarios, no more fears, no more analysis. There was only this. The solid feel of his body against mine, the possessive grip of his hands on my hips, the dizzying, intoxicating taste of him. My hands, acting on their own volition, came up to clutch at his shoulders, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had just been tipped on its axis. It was a kiss that spoke a language I had always understood but had never dared to hear. It said, "I see you." It said, "I know." It said, "This is real." It was the end of the conversation and the beginning of everything. The charcoal smudges on my fingers were probably staining his shirt, but for the first time in my life, I didn't care about making a mess. I was part of one. A beautiful, chaotic, terrifying mess. And it felt like coming home. The kiss broke, but we didn't move apart. He rested his forehead against mine again, and we just breathed. The air was thick, heavy, filled with the aftermath of that cataclysmic moment. His breathing was as ragged as mine, his chest rising and falling in sharp, unsteady movements against my own. I kept my eyes squeezed shut, afraid that if I opened them, he would vanish. That this would all be an elaborate, cruel dream, and I'd wake up alone in my quiet, gray apartment. Leo, he breathed, his voice hoarse. His name on my lips was a prayer, a question, an answer. I finally dared to open my eyes. He was right there, inches away, his expression stripped of all its usual confidence. He looked wrecked. His eyes were wide, searching mine, and in their depths, I saw a mirror of my own terrified hope. This was real. This was happening. His hands loosened their grip on my hips, but didn't leave. They slid around to the small of my back, pulling me even closer, if that was possible, until our bodies were molded together. It was a gesture of reassurance, of possession. A silent statement, I'm not letting go. I started, but my voice was a broken whisper. What could I possibly say? How could I articulate the 12 years of longing that were currently log-jammed in my throat? How could I explain that my entire world had just been fundamentally and irrevocably altered by a single, desperate kiss? Don't, he whispered, his thumb stroking a slow, soothing line over the base of my spine. Not yet. Just stay here. With me. Just for a minute. And so we stood there, in the middle of my messy studio apartment, holding on to each other as if we were the last two people on Earth. The unfinished canvases on the walls were our silent witnesses. The city hummed on outside my window, oblivious. But in here, time had stopped. There was only the warmth of his body, the steadying pressure of his hands on my back, and the clean, intoxicating scent of him filling my lungs. His head dipped, and he pressed a soft, slow kiss to the corner of my mouth. It was nothing like the first one. This was gentle. It was tender. It was a question, and I answered by turning my head slightly, meeting his lips with my own. This kiss was different. It was a conversation. It was a slow, deliberate exploration, a mapping of new territory. There was no desperation in it, only a sense of wonder, of discovery. The initial shock began to recede, replaced by a wave of sensation so powerful it was almost overwhelming. I could feel the rough texture of his stubble against my skin, the softness of his lips, the way his fingers flexed against my back, pulling me closer with each beat of my heart. My hands slid from his shoulders up into his hair. It was thick and soft, and I tangled my fingers in it, holding his head, anchoring him to me, terrified he might pull away. But he didn't pull away. He leaned into my touch, a low sound rumbling in his chest, a sound of pure contentment that vibrated straight through me. The kiss deepened again, but it was a shared escalation this time, a mutual spiraling upward. My carefully constructed walls, the ones I'd spent more than a decade building, brick by painful brick, were gone. They hadn't just been breached, they'd been obliterated. And in their place was this raw, terrifying, beautiful vulnerability. He finally broke the kiss, pulling back just enough so we could breathe. His eyes were dark, hooded, his lips slightly swollen. He looked thoroughly kissed, and the sight sent a fresh jolt of possessive heat through me. I did that. I was the reason he looked like that. I'm sorry, he murmured, his voice thick. The words were a splash of cold water. My heart clenched. Sorry. Sorry for what? I asked, my voice barely audible. Had I misread everything? Was this a mistake? A drunken, impulsive mistake? For waiting so long, he clarified, his gaze intense, unwavering. For being a coward. For not having this conversation years ago. Relief washed over me so completely that my legs felt weak. I sagged against him, and he held me steady, his arms a strong, solid cage around me. I didn't know there was a conversation to be had. I admitted, the confession a painful, liberating thing. A wry, sad smile touched his lips. Yeah, you did, Leo. And so did I. We were just both too scared to start it, he was right. We had been orbiting this truth for years, caught in the gravitational pull of our friendship, too afraid to risk a collision that might destroy everything. But tonight, He had steered us directly into the heart of it. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. His touch was reverent. "All those years," he said, his voice quiet with a new kind of wonder. "I'd watch you. In the library, in your studio. You get this look on your face when you're drawing. So focused. So completely yourself. And I would just think, I want to be a part of that world. Not just on the outside looking in." He had been watching me. The realization was stunning. I had always thought I was the only one observing, the one cataloging the secret moments. But he had been watching me right back. Our friendship hadn't been a one-way street of unrequited feelings. It had been a two-lane highway of mutual, unspoken, terrified pining. The sheer, staggering waste of it all, the years we had lost to fear, was almost too much to bear. "Why now, Alex?" I whispered. "What changed?" He sighed, a long, heavy sound. "Stephanie. Not her, specifically, but her. People like her. It was easy. It was what I was supposed to do. Date the pretty girl, think about settling down. But every time I was with her, I was thinking about you. I'd be at dinner, and she'd be talking, and all I could think was, Leo would find this story hilarious, or I'd see something I wanted to build, and my first thought would be, I wonder what Leo would think of the design. Everything just came back to you. It always has." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Last week, she asked me if I loved her. And I opened my mouth to say yes, because it was the easy thing to do. The next step in the play. And I couldn't. The word just stuck in my throat. Because it would have been a lie. And I realized. I told you I never lied to you. But I have been. I've been lying to you, and to myself, every single day. By not saying this. By not doing this." He punctuated the last word by leaning in and kissing me again, softly this time. It was a kiss of punctuation. A period at the end of a long, painful sentence. It was a seal on his confession. When he pulled away, he looked at me, his eyes clear and certain. The confusion was gone. The weariness was gone. In their place was a quiet, steady resolve that was more powerful than any grand declaration. The apartment was silent again, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer tense or heavy. It was peaceful. It was the quiet of a storm that has finally passed, leaving the air clean and fresh. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant siren of an ambulance wailing its way through the city streets. The world was still turning, but mine had been reborn. I finally found my voice. "So what happens now?" I asked, the question laced with a lifetime of ingrained caution. Alex smiled, a real smile this time. It was slow and warm, and it reached all the way to his eyes, crinkling the corners. It was the smile I had loved for 12 years. "Now," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur that sent a shiver down my spine. "I'm thinking we finish these beers. And then maybe you can show me your bedroom." The suggestion was so direct, so unapologetically confident, that a laugh bubbled up out of me. It was a startled, rusty sound, but it was genuine. It felt good. After the emotional intensity of the last hour, the simple, earthly desire in his voice was grounding. It was real. His smile widened at the sound of my laughter. "Too soon," he teased, his eyes sparkling with a familiar, playful mischief. "No," I said, shaking my head, a matching smile finally finding its way to my own face. "No, not too soon." He held me for a moment longer, then released me, though he kept one hand on my waist, a warm, possessive anchor. He turned and picked up our 2 beers from the coffee table, handing me mine. Our fingers brushed again, but this time there was no jolt of surprise. There was just a comfortable, humming warmth. A rightness. We didn't talk much after that. There were no more grand confessions or soul-bearing revelations. The big things had been said, not just in words, but in the kiss that had changed everything. Now was the time for small things. We migrated to the kitchen, the cramped, poorly lit heart of my apartment. I leaned against the counter, sipping my beer, while he explored. He ran his hand over the worn butcher block, peered into my sparsely populated fridge, and examined the collection of mismatched mugs on the open shelf. He was seeing my life, my real life, not as a visitor anymore, but as someone who was now a part of it. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. "You still have it," he said, his voice soft. He was holding the mug I'd given him for his 21st birthday. It had a stupid cartoon dog on it, and said, "World's okayest friend." "Of course I do." I replied, my voice equally quiet. I had never used it. It sat on the shelf, a relic from a time I thought was the best I could ever hope for. He turned, the mug still in his hand, and looked at me over the small kitchen island. The fluorescent light was unflattering, casting harsh shadows, but I had never seen him look more beautiful. The playfulness was gone from his expression, replaced by a deep, quiet emotion that made my chest ache. I'm an idiot, Leo. You are. I agreed, my lips twitching into a smile. But you're my idiot. The words hung in the air between us, simple and true. He placed the mug back on the shelf with deliberate care and closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. He took the beer from my hand, set it on the counter, and then framed my face with his hands. Yours, he repeated, his voice a low growl. I liked the sound of that, and he kissed me again, slow and deep, against the backdrop of my messy kitchen. And in that moment, surrounded by the ordinary props of my lonely life, I felt anything but. I felt found. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. For a disoriented moment, I thought I'd dreamed it all. The beer, the confession, the shattering, world-altering kisses. I thought I'd woken up to the same empty reality I did every other day. My heart seized with a familiar, cold dread. I opened my eyes. I was in my own bed, tangled in my own sheets. And I was alone. The dread solidified, a heavy weight in my stomach. Of course, it was a mistake. A moment of emotional confusion on his part. He'd woken up in the clear light of day, realized what he'd done, and fled in a panic, leaving me to piece my broken hope back together. I squeezed my eyes shut, a wave of humiliation washing over me. How could I have been so stupid? How could I have let myself believe, even for a few hours, that it was real? But the smell of coffee was undeniable. It was rich and dark, and it wasn't the instant coffee I usually choked down. It was the good stuff, the expensive beans I kept in the back of the cupboard for special occasions that never seemed to arrive. I sat up, the sheet pooling around my waist. My t-shirt from last night was on the floor. His Henley was right next to it. A sliver of hope, fragile and tentative, pushed its way through the panic. I swung my legs out of bed and pulled on a pair of sweatpants. My movements were slow, cautious, as if a sudden move might shatter the delicate possibility that I wasn't alone. I walked out of my bedroom and into the main room. And there he was, Alex. He was standing in my kitchen, shirtless, wearing his jeans from last night. His back was to me. His shoulders were broad, the muscles shifting under his skin as he reached up to open a cabinet. The morning light from the window illuminated the strong column of his neck, the slight curl of his hair. He looked so at home, so perfectly, naturally in place, that it stole my breath. He hadn't run. He was here. He was making coffee in my kitchen as if it were the most normal thing in the world. The relief was so profound, so absolute, that I had to grip the doorframe to keep my knees from buckling. He must have heard me, because he turned. His hair was a mess, and there was a faint red mark on his cheek from my pillowcase. He looked sleepy and real and impossibly handsome. He saw me standing there, and a slow, easy smile spread across his face. It was a private smile, a smile meant only for me. "Morning," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, clutching the doorframe, my heart a wild, frantic thing in my chest. All my morning after fears, all my carefully constructed anxieties, must have been written all over my face. Because his smile softened into something more gentle, more understanding. He put down the mug he was holding and walked toward me. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of me, so close I could feel the warmth of his bare skin. He didn't touch me, not at first. He just looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "You're still here," I finally managed to whisper, the words sounding small and fragile in the quiet room. "Where else would I be?" he asked simply, as if the answer were the most obvious thing in the world. And then he reached out, his hand coming up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my messy hair. His thumb stroked the sensitive skin behind my ear, and I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut. It was a gesture of such profound and simple intimacy. It grounded me more than any words could. "I wasn't dreaming," I said, more to myself than to him. "No," he murmured, his lips brushing against my temple. "You weren't dreaming. And I'm not leaving." He said the words with a quiet finality that settled deep in my bones. I'm not leaving. It was a promise. It was the anchor I didn't even know I'd been searching for my entire life. He pulled me into a hug then, a real hug, his arms wrapping tightly around me, my face pressed against the warm, solid expanse of his chest. I could feel the steady, reassuring beat of his heart against my cheek. I wrapped my own arms around his waist, holding on tight, breathing in his scent, coffee and sleep, and something that was just uniquely, wonderfully him. We stood like that for a long time, a silent reassurance passing between us. There was no awkwardness, no regret, just a quiet, peaceful certainty. The storm had passed, and this was the calm. This was the morning after. Coffee's ready, he finally murmured into my hair. He let me go, and the absence of his warmth was a sudden, sharp loss. But he took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine, and led me to the kitchen counter. There were 2 mugs waiting. He had found my favorite one, the chipped blue one, and filled it for me. He handed it to me, our fingers brushing, and the simple, domestic act felt more intimate than anything that had happened the night before. We leaned against the counter, side by side, our shoulders touching, and drank our coffee in a comfortable silence. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air, turning them into tiny, glittering diamonds. I looked around my apartment. It didn't look gray and drab this morning. It looked warm. It looked like a home. It felt like a home. Alex broke the silence, his voice soft. We should probably actually talk now. I looked at him. He was watching me, a hint of apprehension in his eyes. He was right. We were done with the non-talking part. Now came the hard part. Navigating the wreckage of our old friendship to build something new. Okay, I said, my voice steady. For the first time, the thought of talking, of being completely, utterly honest with him, wasn't terrifying. It was necessary. It was the only way forward. I don't know what this is exactly, he began, his thumb rubbing a nervous circle on his coffee mug. I don't have a map for this, Leo. I just know. I know I was miserable pretending to be something I wasn't. And I know that when I'm with you, I feel right. Like I can finally breathe. He looked at me, his gaze direct and sincere. That's all I've got right now. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Me too, I said, and the simple words were filled with the weight of 12 years of unspoken truth. Alex, I had to say it. I had to let him know the depth of it, the history. I've been in love with you for a very long time. The confession hung in the air, vulnerable and absolute. He didn't look surprised. He just looked sad. Sad for the lost time. He reached out and took my free hand, his grip firm and warm. I think, he said slowly, choosing his words with care, I think I've been in love with you too. I just didn't let myself know what it was called. And that was it. The last wall crumbled. The last secret was laid bare in the bright morning sun. There was nothing left between us but the truth. It was a terrifying, exhilarating, and beautiful place to be. We finished our coffee. We made breakfast, scrambled eggs that I almost burned because I was too busy watching him move around my kitchen. We talked. Not about the future, not about labels or definitions. We talked about small things. About a difficult client he was dealing with. About a new series of paintings I was planning. We fell back into the easy rhythm of our friendship, but it was different now. It was underpinned by a new current, a low, humming frequency of intimacy and unspoken promises. Later, as he was getting ready to leave, he had to go open his shop. A moment of panic seized me. What if this was it? What if he walked out that door and the spell was broken? What if, once he was back in his own world, this all started to feel like a mistake to him? He must have seen the fear in my eyes, because he stopped with his hand on the doorknob. He turned back to me, and the look on his face was so full of gentle understanding it made my chest ache. He walked back to me, framed my face in his hands, and gave me a long, slow, deep kiss that left me breathless. I'll be back tonight, he said against my lips, a clear and unequivocal promise. Don't cook. I'm bringing takeout. He kissed me one more time, a quick, hard peck, and then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, and the apartment was quiet again. But it wasn't an empty quiet. It was a waiting quiet. A quiet filled with anticipation and a deep, humming, joyful hope. I walked over to the window and watched him cross the street, his familiar, confident stride eating up the pavement. He got to the other side, and then, as if he knew I was watching, he stopped and looked up. He found my window, and his face broke into that wide, easy grin, the one that had been stealing my breath for 12 years. He raised a hand in a wave. I raised my hand and waved back. I stood at the window long after he had disappeared around the corner. The sun was higher in the sky now, and my apartment was flooded with light. I looked at the half-finished canvas on my easel. It was a landscape, a study of the sky just before a storm. All dark, brooding clouds, and a heavy, charged atmosphere. It was a self-portrait, in a way, a reflection of the world I had been living in. I picked up a piece of charcoal, but instead of adding more shadows, I began to sketch in a sliver of bright, brilliant light breaking through the clouds on the horizon. It was just a beginning. I didn't know what the final painting would look like. I didn't have a map, but for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of the not knowing. I felt the familiar weight of the charcoal in my hand, the rough texture of the paper under my fingers, and I began to draw. I was no longer just an observer of my own life. I was an active participant. I was creating something new, something full of possibility, something that felt, finally, like a sunrise.